Good day, everyone. It's Alan Schimmel, and you're listening to another DevOps.com webinar. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. Today's webinar is You Build It, You Secure It. It's sponsored by our friends at Electric Cloud, and it's going to be a really special webinar for us because we all happen to be out here in the San Francisco Bay Area for the RSA conference, which is kind of appropriate given the subject matter. And we're doing this in person, all around a table rather than remotely as we usually do our webinars. Before we get started though, let me just take a moment and familiarize our audience with the GoToWebinar control panel. Just a couple of sections of the control panel that I want to bring to your attention. Number one, we've set aside time for questions today. And rather than waiting till the end of the webinar to ask your questions, and you got to remember that question, it could be for 30, 40, 50 minutes, you'll see there's a section of the control panel marked questions. If you click the arrow and make it downward facing, or the caret as some people call it, you'll see that you can actually type your question in there. It's a great way of A, not having to remember your question, B, it gets into our queue so we can load it and get it ready for our panelists to answer. And it actually makes for a much more interactive and orderly way of doing our webinars. Now, if you're having any technical questions or technical issues, perhaps the slides aren't moving or the audio is not working, we do have engineers standing by, and we use our chat session, which is down at the bottom of your control panel. So if you have a problem in there, just type in your problem you're having. One of our engineers will reach out to you and do their best to help you. I see that someone's already asked a question, want to know like this, and yes, like this. That's how you do it. That's how you ask a question. And let me answer the first question, which everyone always asks. Will the slides be available, and is this being recorded? Yes and yes. Well, the slides will be available. The webinar is being recorded. It'll be available on DevOps.com and on DevOps TV, our YouTube channel, usually within 24 hours of today's webinar. So with that being said, let us get started here and move to our panel members. So before we get to our panel members, let us talk about the topic. DevSecOps practices promote building security and quality into the software delivery process. Makes security the path of least resistance. Now, our panel members today, did we have a panel slide after this? Yes.
I think we do, yeah.
Yeah, so let us now go to our panel members
for
today.
A huge panel this morning.
We have a large panel. Actually, but this is a case of quality over quantity in our panel. First of all, I'm joined by Anders Wallgren, CTO of Electric Cloud and a frequent guest on DevOps TV. Anders, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to do this in person for once.
And then, none other than John Willis.
Hey.
John, welcome.
Hey, good, fun.
And, just to give a shout out to SJ Technology, SJ Tech. John works with SJ Tech. They were actually out here at RSA with us. And John, thanks for coming in today. With that being said, gentlemen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, so, the topic was You Build It, You Secure It. Introduction to DevOps. My name is John Willis. I work for SJ Tech. The best place to find me is my Twitter handle, Botchgaloop.
Okay.
So one of the things, just my shameless plug, I'm pretty proud of a book that was released a little over a year ago called the DevOps Handbook, co-written with Gene Kim. And we've done really well. It's been a very popular book. Just completed about 2 months ago an audio project, which is a follow-on to the Phoenix project called the Beyond the Phoenix project. So, and right now it's an audio-only property, but just wanted to get those two out there. So, yeah, good. So one of the things, Josh Corman has said this. He's kind of a friend of DevOps, friend of DevSecOps, one of the progenitors of rugged movement. He used to say this. Mark Andreessen, that basically had the famous quote, "Software is eating the world," and one of the things that Josh would say is the software is infecting the world. So the thing was, it wasn't.
Go back. Yeah, go back. I'm sorry,
no worries. So one of the things that, so John, it wasn't a negative on that, the software. And then like, if you look at open source, there's just an incredible amount of software that just can spread out. And just wants, the idea that, as a security professional, he looks at like all of this as with caution, right? That it's just a lot of software. And so this, one of the things that I started thinking about, as I started to meet people like Josh Corman and others in this kind of DevSecOps rugged movement over the years, is something Werner Wargels, who's the CTO of Amazon, said a long time ago, probably like 2006, 7, or 8, which actually became a battle cry for DevOps, where he would say, "You build it, you run it." So from a developer perspective, is the developer actually kind of owns the operationalization, the running of the code. And that kind of became the mantra of DevOps, right? Early days, we'd say, developers will write pages, and then the operations and then QA and other groups became the people who help the developers get that job done, or a service team. But, it flipped the notion of throwing service code over the wall, right. Operations taking it to a world where operations and then later QA people would put their kind of meta policy and automation into the pipeline. And so as I started noticing some of these really great conversations about DevSecOps, I started thinking it's just a redo with security, that we need to get security people now to flip the mindset of, instead of sending code over to security people or doing out-of-band referencing, the mantra is kind of, you build it, you secure it. It means you're a developer, you own it, right?
You got to share the pain or share the empathy, depending on how you look at it.
And at the end of the day, it's the people who are writing the code that are ultimately you're gonna live or die, right? So the more we can infuse them with the knowledge of security without having to then go out and have to be security experts, the role of an organization is then to feed the supply chain with all the secure boundaries that are needed. So one of the things that I would say, if you want to get scared to death, the Sonatype, they've been running a software supply chain. I think they now have 3 now, I think, but this was last year's data. I think they just released the latest one, so there's some updates here that are even more frightening. The bottom line is, there's a lot of open source code being used. Most people know you write 10 lines of code in some language using much open source technologies. It could be hundreds, thousands, and
millions,
tens of millions, right? A ridiculous amount of lines of code. And just some of their numbers, about how people, again, this was last year. This is, we had a presentation at the DevSecOps days at RSA where Derek Weeks updated some of those numbers, and really, they were, like, if you were scared before, but like this was last year's 31 billion downloads. If you look at the 229, the average component downloads per company, some people say anywhere from 5 to 8 million is the cost of an average breach, right? The bottom line, there's a lot of things going on out there. So,
and I wonder too, in the case of Maven Central, since that's where a lot of us get at least our Java ecosystem stuff. Wonder what percentage of that is an HTTP download versus an HTTPS download? Yeah. Because if you're pulling over HTTP, your supply chain for software is not secure. I mean, you are vulnerable at that point, depending on how paranoid you want to be.
Yeah, and I think they have some tracking. You go upper side.
Go back one?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So one of the things that I got interested in is kind of this. So most of you probably heard of, the Equifax debacle. And again, I'm not trying to use Equifax as a punching bag, because I think it could have been anybody. And in fact, some data points I'll share in a minute. It is a lot of people that potentially, and they don't know it. But if you look at, this was the famous struts to Jakarta. It was a command injection, basically. And if you look at the loose anatomy, again, I think the Sonatype people have better data than most on this. But from my research, it was discovered 2017, March 6th. It was kind of officially announced on the 9th. The CVE was created. The National Institute of Standard Technology CVE was created on the 10th. So, if you follow the events and whose numbers, but it looked like Equifax didn't actually discover it by, I think, their own announcement until sometime in July, and then officially announcing, hey, Houston, we got a problem, as late as September, right? So, that's an anatomy of one company's look at, how, and again, I could use them as a punching bag, and it sounds like I am, but I'm just trying to show the numbers, and that, how you think about security, the numbers show a little bit about how you think about security.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be easy, absolutely, to use them as a punching bag, but it's really, it's a process problem, it's a culture problem, it's a technology problem, and you kind of have to get a lot of those right to be good all the time. So,
which is a perfect lead into the next slide. I happened to run into Chucha Longo, who actually I co-presented with her on Monday at the RSA, and so I got to spend a little time with their team, and she was a Java developer who actually was moved over into a management of an AppSec group, and she treated the pipeline like a Java developer, and I got to see how they were doing security, kind of systemic in the pipeline, really good stuff, and but I got to talk a little about how they reacted to that same that same CVE, the Equifax breach, and so they were notified from kind of their risk group that this was a potentially bad problem. And on the 9th, they literally got in a war room on the 9th with some of the executive team and and her team, the AppSec team, and they literally started a proof of concept to start dealing with this, right? So they took action. Basically, by the next day, they had a running POC. And the thing was that what most people don't realize is, well, most people don't have everything going through a DevOps supply chain, first off. And even if you do, there's still stuff in middleware products and WebSphere. So that library, that Struts2 library, that vulnerable library was everywhere.
Yeah.
So one of the things that she did then is she wrote a little script, and they parallelized it, that all it did was really kind of do that kind of the command injection, and she just hit every internal and external URL, and over a couple of days, they had full remediation. And one of the things that when I talked to them, and I talked to some of their executive team, they talk with pride. They actually had an external DevSecOps days at their place. It was a night, it was a meetup, right? And like 180 people showed up, and they had a panel with their whole executive team. And one of the things you saw in the executive team is something I love to talk about in DevOps, which is it was clear they understood as an organization their true north. And I think that's the thing a lot of companies don't really get right? Their true north, like I heard every executive say, we're the people that put people in houses, right? And if you go to their front page, that's the first thing it says. So the question then is, it could have been anybody, Equifax or whatever, but if your true north is you put people in houses, or we're the people that get people loans, when you see something, well, you've built an infrastructure to protect that true north, which is the possibility of, 15, 20, 30 million loan applications going out in the wild. How do you react? And the truth, so one of the things that happened when Chitra had to write this POC, she asked the executive team to turn off the production loan application over a weekend. Right now, the weekends are like, I bought a couple of houses. Usually you get your loan on, or a car or whatever. Well, I don't think they do cars, but their houses, right, Fed. But like, talk about like living, walking the walk. Right, like our true north, we put people in houses. They're presenting basically the day of the announced breach, and the conclusion is we got to shut down loan application, and they do it.
Which I mean, that is a fantastically kind of responsible response, right? And I think, and part of the problem too is, they did a great thing by kind of hitting all of their vulnerable points and trying to figure out where this was. But even once you find that out, you still don't necessarily know everywhere that library is used. And where it's deployed and how it was deployed and when.
But she was able to replace every hotspot server that could be infected.
I mean, in general.
You still, well, and and that's if you watch her, Alan, that presentation will be online in the DevOps TV, right?
Yes.
So if you watch her full-on presentation, you'll see that like they're crawl walking and getting to running state in making sure that we start creating a hygiene where now things are coming through, we know where they are. And you're right, it's it's still
we don't really have an inventory always of what's where, and
but one of the things I thought about too, though, is one of the stories I always loved about in DevOps was this idea that people would always track mean time to detect or mean time between failures. And as we started seeing some of these emerging companies like Etsy and stuff, they would talk about MTTR, and they'd even have shirts that's like not MTTB, but MTTR. And I always thought about, because the question of MTTR is how good as your team at remediating disaster, real bad things. And I always think of the Apollo 13, the movie with Ed Harris, like where Everybody's got to get together really fast. It's a hard problem.
Here's the box of
people
stuff.
in this case, well, it's even so how do you react? You then do a committee to do a study to find out what kind of tinfoil. Do you get the tinfoil at Walmart or Target, or do you just do it, right? And it's another, as you were talking, it made me think that this was really one of those kind of, I don't know, it could have been 100 ways to fix this problem. Yeah. And they didn't argue about that for 3 days.
Well, and I think they also realized, and it was a potentially existential problem for them, right?
They knew that.
And for some things, you just it's got to be all hands on deck.
And then don't argue about just figure out something that works. In fact, she calls it proudly a POC.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's pretty brilliant, right in the name, that this was a proof of concept. It implied if that didn't work, maybe in 2 days later we would have had a different solution.
Yeah.
So yeah,
absolutely.
So these are just some numbers that come out of the report. I mean, just the bottom line is there's still. I mean, I think it's that second bullet item that was interesting. As a fall of last year, so the Equifax thing made CNN, the Wall Street Journal, everybody knew about it, right? So security's fixed. We know this, right? And then in that report, there were still 46,000 organizations still running that Equifax breach library. How do you so we're just not doing a good job here on general hygiene. People talk about all these crazy attack vectors from foreign agents and all that, but if we're still we have these things.
We're getting the simple things wrong.
That's exactly
still,
right. The simple things, right? Exactly.
Well, but the simple things are not so simple either, right? I mean, that's it.
Right. Well, that vulnerability is 10 years old, right? Yeah. That actual vulnerability was 10 years old. There was a they don't have the slide in here, but there was a Verizon DVR a few years ago where it said that 97% of all the breaches were due to 10 CVEs, and 8 of them were 10 years old. Okay,
I'm laughing.
Stop worrying about the 60 Minutes guy who's trying to figure out the Chinese hacker who's got unbelievable algorithms. The kids.
No, but even the Chinese hacker doesn't use the unbelievable algorithm.
They're
using the 10-year-old CVE too.
Right.
These are time bombs that are implanted throughout our infrastructure here.
And I think a lot of it comes down to, we're not in the mode of these are things we have to know how to fix quickly. Because a lot of these things are probably running in apps that haven't been updated in years, right? It's working fine. So far, so good, right? Said the man who jumped off a building was halfway down.
Yeah.
And so it's nobody's job necessarily or day-to-day, responsibility to worry about that kind of stuff. And so of course it just sits there.
Well, I mean, that kind of leads us into, I think, the next slide, right? Well, actually, I wanted to talk about this because I wanted to get to the point of why are we calling this DevSecOps and all that, but I'll hold up. So here we go. Fool me once, shame on you, right? So, late last year, I still don't understand the anatomy of this one, but late last year, somebody discovered that Spring had an identical type of problem, which was, basically a command injection thing, an HTML tag. CV supposedly got created 1.4, but it turns out, again, I'm not trying to pound on Pivotal. And I was asked by Pivotal because I mentioned this. They come out what should we do? I'm like, I don't know. Pay me, I'll come consult with you. But I told them the Fannie Mae story. I'm because here, I'm getting ahead of myself. Basically, by their admission, they didn't discover it till 2/18/17. So somebody knew about it, back in September in 17, and then they corrected it on the 6th, right? So here we go again. And now, the numbers on Spring, if you look at the next slide, right? The numbers on Spring, not Spring Boot, just Spring. It's again, this is some Sonatype. They were, prior to the breach, 411,000 Spring components that component was being used, and then 5 months after, at least when it was notified, there's still 367,000 people using. And this is the same Equifax. Worse because more people using Spring than just. The struts too have had all sorts of vulnerabilities over the years, but Spring is really huge, right?
Yeah.
So.
It's had a good reputation too.
Intel CPU ones, I forget their names right now.
The Meltdown and Spectre.
Well, that one,
how many of those are being fixed?
I give.
You're not fixing them.
Yeah, no, those are crazy things. I think too. Also, it's a knowledge problem. How do you find out that this vulnerability exists, right? When there's when the airbag in my former car was one of the airbags from Takata or whatever it is, right? It's recalled, and it's a physical thing. You can recall it. Well, it's hard to recall bits once they're out there, right? It's kind of hard to undo that. But we don't even have a process for it. We don't have other than CVEs, which are useful.
Well, and that, that leads into, why are everybody getting all excited about this word DevSecOps, right? Why, and the security people listening, and I hope there's a lot of security people listening, might be saying, what are these guys trying to do? Why are they trying to? And the thing is, I
told you this would happen.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I knew as soon as they got the ops people, they were going to come for us next. And they're right. No, but I mean, you said it, like, how do you fix it? Like, if you start paying attention to the things that, I mean, I was an early progenitor of DevOps. In fact, Patrick Tabar is considered the godfather. And when people call me the godfather, I say, no, I'm the consigliere, right? Like, because I was kind of like almost second in line. I mean, a lot of people made that movement happen, but the thing is that if you watched early on, I mean, I had people, even Gene Kim admits that when I first met him, he actually asked me if I thought, and this is like 2010, right? He was working on the Phoenix project. He kind of asked me that if I thought that was DevOps more of a fad than something real, and I gave him, no, this is real. This is real stuff. This is not just a bunch of people trying to make money on a fad and all. And I mean, I could be wrong this time, but like DevSecOps is real stuff. When you watch Shannon Leeds over at Intuit, and you see Chitra Lango over at Fannie Mae, and you watch some of the presentations that are going to go up from our DevSecOps days, like these are people doing real things. And the thing that they're doing, and the reason this is going to work and is working for these people, is we have to do what we did for DevOps. What we did for DevOps was we switched the narrative of, I think I said this earlier, a developer creating stuff, throwing it at a wall, and then some operations person doing it. And then we did the same thing with QA. So what happened there were operations people learned that they had to put their kind of meta, their policy, and their automation in the delivery chain. Now, you had to have a delivery chain. That's kind of core of DevOps. Yeah. And when that happened, you started seeing the speed and resilience. And this is actually a slide that was kind of stolen or attributed to the 2008, I think, slide, which was done by Jez Humble, Chris Reed, and Dan North. And it was, and it's the Wikipedia page. And so the DevOps chain was about creating resilience through kind of gating. The developer puts something in, and imagine now the operations have created all their meta automation, right? They put it in, it goes green, green, red, go back. Developer fixes it, green, 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 red, go back, right? And when you start seeing this over time, this is what creates kind of I hate the word anti-fragility, but sometimes there's no other word to use, but anti-fragility. But that's where you create that resilience is through that strength. And I think there's some stats on Google that's like 150 million automated tests a day. Yeah. Like that's how you create like incredible resilience. And so what we're saying here for DevSecOps is just the map that we did with operations and QA of adding their kind of gates, if you will, policy and automation. We just want the security people, and companies like Fannie Mae and Intuit are already doing this, among a bunch of others. We want the security people to kind of flip in the same narrative where they give us more gates. They help us define, or help developers define test-driven development. They help us get better scanners and more scanners. And we just, everything that goes through the supply chain. And that's how we don't fix everything, but we start creating security hygiene in the way we deliver software.
I mean, security is like quality in some ways, right? It
is quality. Yeah.
It's a measurement. It is
quality. It is. Right? A bug is a bug is a bug.
Yeah,
right?
but what I mean is, it's a measurement problem, right? The quality and depth and frequency of your measures, tell you, if you're measuring quality once at the end.
That's the thing about security, Anders. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. With security, there's metrics.
Yeah.
And how many vulnerabilities you find per X lines of code.
And you can't sprinkle security on it at the end any more than you can sprinkle quality on it at the end.
To be I want to get to a world where it's just a defect, right? Yeah. It's just like I see people running like Jira for what they say software defects, and then the security somewhere else, right? A defect is a defect.
Yeah.
Well,
but there's something to be said for that though too, John, and don't mind me just jumping in.
No, guys do.
I love this being able to
do
it.
I know,
right? So in security, timing is everything, right? Where in DevOps, so much of the focus was on that delivery pipeline, right? Prior to deployment. I mean, we did our testing there. We didn't let code, the idea anyway, is we didn't let code get deployed that wasn't tested.
Yeah.
But in security, one of the gotchas is it may be good when we deployed it.
That's right.
But that's the point, right? That's so if you listen to what Shannon and we have to just shift left. We can't wait to the mindset of security as an outsider coming in within the last couple of years is that we prep perimeter and we get them when they try to break us.
Yep.
And what DevOps is saying, well, we learned that same lesson a while back. We try to get it back at the IDE.
Yeah.
We try to get it when you do commit the code.
Yeah.
We try to get it during the CI. And
that's 85, you say 97. I think it's probably about 85% of vulnerabilities or breach incidents from Verizon's data happen from known vulnerabilities, right? As an industry, now I'm talking as a security person here, we have spent the last 15 years on what we call 0 days, right? That unknown 0-day vulnerability that we didn't know about and boom, gotcha, it's in the wild, right? Microsoft's Patch Tuesday was always about 0 days.
Yeah.
But we found that's not the big gotcha. The big gotcha is the 10-year day.
Yeah. But here's the thing, even too, right? Like, so, just stealing a lot of DevOps isms. Mary Poppendick, right? She wrote Lean Software Development. She's legendary in kind of lean software and clean software development. And she has this great quote, like, how long does it take you to get one line of code through your system? Right? Like, like that's.
I ask a very similar question when I talk to people, which is, it's the eve of release to production of your big fancy new thing, and you find a showstopper bug, right? It can't ship. But for the sake of argument, it's a one-line fix.
Yeah.
Right? It's a Boolean that we flip and it's good. How long till you get back to where you were just now?
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many organizations they don't know.
Yeah. But I mean, what I'm saying is that's like, so how long does it take you to get? So when it is like this is a defect in your face, what is your hygiene and what is your ability to get that remediated? And is it that you don't have manifests, like, so, I mean, I'm not going to go too far off the reservation. When you get to containers, right, like you can build manifests into, we talk about immutable delivery, right? Yeah. So I can build manifests into all my containers. So now I have a bill of material because this is, Toyota supply chain 101. Yeah. So now when I know where all those breaks are, and I can literally write a command to hit all those and remediate them, right? Yeah. So, I mean, so again, the meta, given that we don't want to take too much time, is that what DevSecOps should be telling people is we need to spend a lot more time on our software hygiene. Like, we've done a really good job, DevOps, right? I mean, most companies now who say, we're doing DevOps, you'll see them have, pretty, sophisticated IDEs with a lot of plugins. So, I mean, you would be almost a foreign entity to not be running something like GitHub or GitLab or some type of source control. Same thing with a build, and then some type of behavior-driven test, and then some form of provisioning automation, whether it's containers or Chef or Puppet, and then again shout out to Electric Cloud, right? Like you guys have the kind of soup to nuts, so the customer, because there's a lot of work. A lot of organizations don't have all the kind of people. Yeah. Like I mean, the truth of the matter, setting up Jenkins is easy to install. Than setting up like 15 plugins and 20 plugins and making sure they connect to Nexus or JFrog, and that's a lot of work.
I always talk about us as kind of the conveyor belt, and we bring the code to all the different stations, like in a plant, And one of the things we did at the show was kind of survey people a little bit about where are your problems, where are your pain points, and some of the numbers are kind of interesting. Like, so 30%. This is what people self-reported, right? So, and probably small sample size too, but 30%, over 30% discover problems in QA or UAT. 25% discover problems in production. 20% said it would take more than a week to produce an audit log. 7% said they wouldn't be able to do it at all, which that's a little scary. 40% said they don't have secure, versioned, or audit-friendly pipelines, which is, that's a little frightening too. But hey, 60% do. So
yeah.
I'm going to look on the bright side.
With the bad, yeah.
40% said it would take more than a week to add a new security tool to the pipeline. 2% said they couldn't do it at all. A week to add a new tool isn't necessarily that bad, right? I mean, but it's difficult.
Go on.
So just so I mean, the thing that we're kind of talking about here with DevSecOps is, it's common knowledge that in a DevOps, kind of a mature DevOps organizational structure or a high-performing organization that is using DevOps patterns and practices that you would expect. I mean, I don't care which product is in every one of those boxes, delivery team, version control, build, test, release, but you had something in every box.
Yeah.
And so what DevSecOps is kind of represents, a couple of things. One is trying to flip the narrative to the developer driving security and the security people making sure they're putting the guardrails in, and then making sure every box is kind of filled up so that you can shift left.
Yeah.
And I think that that really is kind of and start thinking about security through a systemic systems approach of how we think about it.
Next slide.
Yeah. So and so one of the things I wanted to talk about. Okay.
We about a half hour.
Oh yeah. Okay. Good. Because I want to make sure we. One of the things that was interesting, and so early this year, I was invited to a Chicago Cyber Conference, and I was doing the afternoon keynote, and they had a hacker, anonymous hacker, and it was the
behind the screen.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, confessions of a hacker. And he was going in, he was giving how he goes into these companies, and one of the things he goes and he finds bids or opportunities that he finds on the dark web, right? And then he said he'd go hang out near the headquarters and go to the coffee shop, find out how they dress. And then he was kind of almost laughing us at an industry. He's like, so, and sometimes I'll clone their badges, RFID clone. But he said it was I think he's talked about 5 breaches that he did. He didn't name the companies. 4 of them, he was like astounded that people just held the door open for him. He didn't even have to use the badge, right? And as he was thinking about that, and he was almost giggling as you guys do all this security stuff, and I was thinking to myself, I wonder if this kid had ever heard of Palo Alto, or and I bet you if you interviewed, what's that? I don't know, doesn't get mine. And he said you just get in, find an empty cube, and then just sniff around, and once you're in, right? Yeah. And then he basically slap a Raspberry Pi, and you get out of the building, and he's got you.
Social engineering social hacking is still a big.
Yeah, but the thing, and he spent a lot of time on sometimes how he would act like he was in a fight with his wife on the phone, and people go all that. But the thing that caught me is the thing he didn't understand, which was that so as sometimes my early career, I spent a lot of years at Exxon, right, and there's this Diane Vaughn has this thing called the normalization of deviance. You're told every year that don't hold the door open for people, but then Bob's 5 steps behind you, and he's
carrying a heavy
he's
box.
10 cubes from you, and you don't hold the door, and he cusses you out, and then that again and again and again. And you're like, you know what? I'm just sick and tired. That's what do? You hold the door open for people. And this kid didn't know that. And I was thinking about really kind of to end this discussion, because one of the things that is the most powerful thing about DevOps is the culture, behavior, and change. And I thought we can do all these things, and I think we should put things into Hygiene. I think we should use things like Electric Cloud to drive that, to give us a framework to do these things. We should get security people to start giving us the matter and policy, help developers secure. But I use this scenario as imagine if you wanted security to win through culture. So imagine a scenario with Jane. It's raining, it's cold. She's holding 10 boxes. She's 4 steps behind you. You let the door close. You wait because you're a gentleman and you're going to help once she gets behind. But she has to badge in, and you're sitting here oh my God, I'm going to get yelled at.
Yeah.
And she comes up and points you in the face, says, I want to thank you for making our company more secure. Yeah. Right? It's about culture. You go to Fannie Mae, it's about culture. We can do all the toys and millions or $100 million of technology and this if we could just get that simple notion where, a 40,000 organization where everybody thanks somebody for not holding the door open, then we're winning more than any technology. So I've kind of gone through my stuff. I think there's more slides.
It's a counterintuitive thing too, right? Because it's, you want to hold that door open, you don't want to make it more difficult.
And I, only quick thing I'll say about this is,
sorry, John.
No worries. Yeah. The goal, what I've been saying, there's always been this notion of where's the Goldilocks Zone for security. Martin Casado, he's the inventor of SDN really, and then from the Sierra was sold to VMware, and he would say it was in a hypervisor, which I think he was partially right. And I was thinking about, as I was creating this presentation, I was thinking the real Goldilocks Zone is the supply chain. Right? That's the, we don't want to, even the hypervisor is better than perimeter. He would say 80% of our spend is on perimeter, 20% is on non-perimeter. We got it wrong. We should flip that. And he sells hypervisors, right? At VMware, he's saying so the Goldilocks Zone is hypervisor. And he's right, because it is, you're catching it long before they, like in that model, you're catching it before they invade the VM, right? But I'm saying like the real Goldilocks Zone is if we get our hygiene right and get our security in the supply chain, starting with the ID, starting with the storage, starting with test-driven development, getting multiple scanners. Shannon Lee said today in a presentation, RSA, like use the commercial scanners you got, but then also use some open source ones because that's what the bad guys are using, right? So that's the real Goldilocks Zone. So I think
having sold vulnerability scanning for about 15 years, the good organizations always use 2 to 3 different scanners, if for nothing else, just to see what the diff is. Right. And the fact of the matter is, most of your commercial scanners are based on open source scanners, but that's a whole nother story. Anyway, let's move to our next slide.
Yeah, and I think so the new Goldilocks Zone is where we literally have not only our kind of DevOps hygiene for operations and QA and all those things, but we also are modeling that same abstraction for security in the pipeline. So all right, so we can flow through. Let's get to kind of the architectural. And this is just an interesting. The slides will be available.
Yes, they're all available.
So
just let me know where to stop.
Yeah, just go to.
We could probably just flip to mine if you.
Yeah,
there we go.
So I think this is probably still one of your slides here, John. But here we go. All right. So thinking in terms of kind of secure pipeline orchestration, or what you can do in your software pipeline. And when I use the word pipeline, we all have software pipelines. For some of us, your software pipeline is a guy named Bob who sits next to the build machine and runs the builds for you. For some of us, it's a little bit more of a complex process, and there's lots of things involved in it. So this is more addressed, kind of at the, you have a pipeline, you want to make it better kind of thing. Now, all of the things that we want to put in the pipeline are things that we want to run all the time, right? Now, we don't necessarily want them as part of the CI pipeline, because a security scan can take a significant amount of time. I mean, yesterday in the panel that we were all discussing, the idea that some scans are going to take you 3 days to do. You're obviously not going to do that as part of your CI pipeline, but as part of your path to production, you want to make sure that happens at least sometime, right? And you have that. So if we flip forward, I'll kind of address this stuff a little bit. So in this notion of kind of the Goldilocks zone, and I think you can build this one out. I think there we go. Okay. Yeah. We have even though we're in the same room, we actually have a little bit of a delay between the slides and everything. So model and automate everything. Get everything that is involved in your your kind of electronic bill of materials, if you will, and make sure that it's coming in under your pipeline, so that you can reliably and repeatably run through that as part of the way that you build, test, qualify, release, deploy, patch your software. And so that you're always ready, so that if it's a simple thing, a little bit of air quotes around simple, but if it's as simple as just we need to upgrade a dependency to get a fix for a vulnerability in, right? That should be one line of code, check it in, and then the pipeline kicks off, and then however long it takes for your pipeline to crank through that and do all the validation, you're done, you're ready to deploy it. That is something that we all need to be able to do. So the pipeline hygiene has to involve the ability to do quick fixes and crank things out, fast. And then, environments and automation as a service. One of the reasons we don't spend a lot of time doing security stuff is because we're waiting for environments to get set up. We're not just security stuff, but everything. We're having to wait for the SecOps committee to approve the environment that we want to stand up, instead of saying, let's pre-approve them, make them self-service environments, and you just push a button and get it. Be able to adopt new technologies and drop them into the pipeline and just say, look, here's a new vulnerability scanner we found. It found some interesting things. So, hey, we want to run that all the time now.
Yeah, it's funny too, because you guys also can create hygiene for building those environments. In fact, you see a lot of these kill chains include default Jenkins. So the pipeline can be the entree for the bad guys. And so having a tool that actually can create a framing and modeling to provision the things you need to build the chain correctly and secure.
Yeah, and there's probably, there's absolutely kind of an 80-20% there in terms of the 80% of everybody's pipelines are going to look roughly the same, with some, but then there are going to be some that are very different, right? For technology reasons, for political reasons, for all of those kinds of things. But the point being, build it in, model, automate everything, do everything as code. Your pipeline ought to be code. You should be able to check that stuff into SCM. We used to think of our installers as an integral part of the product, right? Because there was user experience involved and those kinds of things. Well, today our pipeline kind of serves that purpose in some ways, right?
The installer is the pipeline.
Yeah, that's how you get.
It's Git. It's whatever it is. Right?
It's all of that stuff.
Puppet Chef or a container. Or
yeah. And yet we don't treat it as a feature of our product as much as we ought to. And that leads to bad things, right? So monitor, track your releases, have dashboards, know that all the, visibility is a huge thing in DevOps, and certainly for DevSecOps as well. Transparency, visibility, knowing where we are, did we build with that bad version of the library or did we build with the right version? All of those kinds of things. So be able to track those kinds of things and know where you are in the process. Yeah. And then, and I'll harp on this a little bit more because I find that, the whole idea of environment provisioning, self-service, setting up pipelines, all of those kinds of things, we spend a lot of time on that and we don't often get it, or we often don't get it right. Do it as a self-service thing. Set it up once, right? If you got 500 product teams with 500 different applications, you probably don't have 500 completely different pipelines or 500 completely different architectures, right? There's got to be some commonality there. So best of breed and sharing and all of those kinds of things are very important. And make security, it sounds kind of trite, but make security the path of least resistance. Make it so that the default thing that a developer does is secure. That if I set up an environment and I do some testing on it, that is set up the same way it's going to be in production, so things don't work or not work based on that.
Yeah, the batteries included concept should be default security, right?
Yeah. And even if you don't, we should probably, as part of the Flow product, ship our default pipeline as insert security stage here, and make people at least say, well, no, we don't have security. We don't need that. Sorry, and kind of go on from that and maybe shame people a little bit into this. But then, shift left, and once you have kind of an end-to-end pipeline, you now have also the ability to very quickly collect the audit logs, reach those things. And it's a very real problem that we've run into with some of our customers where, we need to go look at the log to see what happened there, but we don't have access to the logs. Your pipeline should give you access to that information or should collect it at runtime or those kinds of things. So that you don't spend 2 days or 7 days waiting for somebody to approve your request for the log when it's something that you ought to have, at your fingertips when you need it, those kinds of things. So we have to get out of our way a little bit as well.
It's funny. I mean, a lot of people who kind of build, will build like security, build pipelines. They'll do it yourself, Jenkins, plugins, do this, right? And then they get to a level of maturity until the auditor knocks on the door and then says, okay, can I see the logs?
Yeah.
Like, oh, then I'm going to spend another 6 months on a project. How do you collect those artifacts and make them available and visible? And again, that's another thing I like about Electric Cloud is like, for the people who aren't going to roll up sleeves and do all that work themselves from day one, it's already built in.
Yeah, we've talked, I've used the phrase a lot, and it's, it's not 100% true, but, automation is auditing. Right. If you have a definition of your automation,
it should be, right? Like
that is your documentation of how you do things. And the runtime version of that is your proof that you did what you documented. Those are the two things auditors want. They want a lot more, but two things. And then also, kind of adopt new technologies safely. If you start to build microservices or containers, drop in all the nice new products that are out there for scanning your containers and all of those things. It ought to be, we got to make it a lot easier, we as an industry to do that, right? And just say, oh, cool new tool came along that scans this, that, or other, drop it in, right? Make that happen. And then just a quick pitch for Electric Flow Community Edition, free to use. Go ahead and download it. You can play around with it. Do some of the cool stuff. You see some of the cool stuff we're working on. But other than that, I think we're ready for some Q&A and other things. Yeah.
So we've got a few questions here. Excuse me. Of course, we'll get more, I'm sure, once we start, as it always happens, no matter what I say in the beginning.
That's right.
All right. Our first question comes from Hickam. There was an interesting question that wasn't answered. How can somebody stay up to date with all the news about vulnerabilities? Like, there are too many things going on around in a DevOps job. Is there a place where you can know all this news?
Again, it's simple and it's hard, right? The simple is like, don't let the things that are known, like don't be one of those, 97% breaches from the DBR Horizon that were 10-year-old that everybody knew. I mean, it's one thing about the struts too, right? Like, I mean, nobody really knew. and that it was there for 10 years. But like certainly when it was announced, so you should have, you need to have at a minimum some group of authority, whether it's through the CISO or it's risk, that basically watchdogs these things. Fannie Mae knew about it that day, right? They did a POC.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of opportunities. Some of them are proprietary solutions. Some of them are just writing your own kind of scanners and scripts. I mean, I found the first place I saw the struts too. I didn't take everybody's data. I went back and I did my own research to see, because I've been talking to a couple of companies. How did you react? How did you find out about it? Some of them are for commercial solutions that come in through risk. That's the expensive, but you're a bank,
Yeah.
right? But then I saw that it was like the 7th or 8th, there was an issue in the Red Hat database, right? So Red Hat knew about it, and Red Hat was racing to get their stuff fixed before they announced it. But I mean, there are people that that you can go out and like, you shouldn't be one of those people where the whole world is notified on a certain date, 6 months later, finding out that you have it, right?
Yeah,
So
I mean,
there's a couple of things though, guys, if I can just talk. First of all, for too long, the security industry has suffered from the boy who cried wolf syndrome, right? There are so many CVEs, there are so many vulnerabilities. And as a security team, we publish a book that looks like the yellow pages on our scan.
yeah.
And how the heck are you as an ops guy? Oh, they're all marked,
Mhm.
double star,
Yeah, it's all
right? Ultra death, do right
Yeah.
away. But,
double black diamond.
and then how do you do that? But John, I want to make a shameless plug for you. We announced at DevSecOps Days at RSA the launch of the website DevSecOpsDays.com,
Yeah.
and we're going to start putting, the Mark Miller and the rest of the team, start putting this kind of information up there, reference architectures, news, alerts, these kinds of things. I mean, Sonatype does it with open source tools, but there's a big world out there. So check out DevSecOpsDays.com and DevSecOps Days. We're coming to a couple cities around the world. We'll be doing more, but we're trying to create a community for people to stay up.
And again, I think there's just a lot out there. I mean, I know it's daunting. And it's daunting if you haven't done DevOps. Like I spend a lot of time talking to people, just getting them jump started on DevOps. And it's daunting to just, say, oh, I've heard all about DevOps and I got to do it. And it's scary, right? Look, DevSecOps is going to be scary too, but you have to look for these resources. People look, defect density, that was something Aetna had presented very well. So start thinking about what are the metrics that, are you scanning everything? There's a signal noise ratio in scanning, and scanning is not an end all be all.
Yeah.
But then what are you looking for? Is there a defect density? Shannon Lees talks about, if you want to really get advances, are you tracking your adversaries? Do you know how long they're staying on your site? Do they come back and they stay there, or they don't? Like, are they finding good stuff on your site? So there's a lot. The journey is long.
Yeah.
I think there's also still just sort of blocking and tackling as an industry. Like, do you know every version of every library that's deployed in production in your organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know that, then don't bother reading the CVs, right? Because they're going to be meaningless to you.
Yeah.
You're not even going to be able to filter by where the vulnerability is. So having good knowledge of what's running where is kind of a prerequisite.
But that intelligence is built into some of the scanners. Some of the scanners will only alert you to ones that are to vulnerabilities that are relevant to you. If you don't have that library, they don't alert you. If they do, they do. But again, it's a tools thing, but it's not a tools thing. It's a people thing.
It's an everything thing. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but it's like you have to have good supply chain hygiene, right? Which is DevOps 101.
Yep.
And how do you get that? You do have artifact repositories. You do have a mature pipeline delivery tool. You do have some level of manifest, or if you're Java, you're POM based, right? So now you can basically look where everything is from there. If you're doing middleware, then you should be constructing it with like a chef or a puppet or a containerization, right? So you're starting to slowly build, but it's not easy, right? It's daunting, and this is, and it isn't easy for DevOps, and it's not going to be easy for DevSecOps.
Yeah, no, but it's also worth it. I mean,
it's required.
It's required. Well, but not only required, but it also works.
You got a business. I mean, in fact, we have an ethical responsibility to get this right.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's not get into the
I'll leave it at that.
Let me jump to the next question from John Trump. And You may think that's a phony name, but it's not. I met John. He was at DevSecOps days this week, and he wants to know what are some other good metrics to use.
Oof. So I'm going to let John talk to some of the security specific ones, but I think some of the ones that you want to understand about your own pipeline is how quickly can I get a change out, right? If the answer to that is 2 weeks, you might want to think about, fixing that, right? So there's a lot of, again, blocking and tackling, and how, even if I know exactly which dependency to update or which line of code affects from the time I do that to when it's live, how long does that take? Right. So cycle times and lead times for those kinds of things are very, very important, because if they're too long, your window of vulnerability.
I think the holy grail of the DevOps, what we've been able to do through the research and studies is that high performing organizations have kind of decreasing lead time and correlated decreasing MTTR.
Yeah.
So that just shows the promise of DevOps. This is just DevOps in general, is that you can go faster and be more resilient. And if you continue to correlate that way, the faster you go, your MTTR goes down as well, and sometimes in a faster progression. So that's general hygiene, whether it's security or software delivery. And then the things that I think people start looking at in security is, I think I say easy ones, but there's a level of maturity to get there. But is defect density, like how many Sev1, Sev1 or Sev2 security defects per like 10,000 lines of code. Like the Etna talks a lot about that. The more advanced ones would be what Shannon Leitz is, if you want to follow some of the stuff that she talks about, starting recognizing your adversaries and being able to identify the adversaries. She's a big fan of signal science, right? So she says she gets incredible intel there to help her figure out who, among a lot of other data, to figure out who those adversaries are. Yeah. And if they're coming and leaving right away, then you're not finding, this is all capitalism, folks, right? Like you've got some high risk or a cost of service, and they've got an ROI of what it's going to cost them to get you.
How does a store prevent or help prevent shoplifting? Yeah. Well, the guy who's been walking around in the store not doing anything for 20 minutes, you probably want to have a chat with him and see what he's up to, right? It's the same kind of
your security starts working is if you knew who the bad guys were. When the bad guy comes in, he looks around and says, "Yeah, this isn't gonna work. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to the next place," right? So that's a lot of what Shannon
never underestimate that.
And
hackers go for the low hanging. It's like walking down a hotel.
Yeah, and you're looking for the unlocked doors.
I don't want to mess with the locked doors.
Yeah, or exactly. It's just it's really a kind of an ROI transaction for them, right? Like if this is going to be incredibly hard, then I'll just go someplace else where it's easy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're rational like the rest of us, right?
So that's part of the cloud thing, right? So in the cloud, you have a big prize, right? If you can break into AWS.
Yeah.
But the effort required, because AWS has the resources to, not AWS, any of the public. They can really.
Well, one of the things that's one thing Shannon talks about, like, is that don't be fooled. Like they're using like deep learning, AI, ML. They're using cloud. The bad guys are using the same tools we're on, in a lot of cases better than we are.
They're always That's the whole.
Like all those things that have made us commerce so amazing. They're actually using to get us.
Right. It was a response. Anyway, let's move on to the next question. And this is from Arthur Hicken. There seems to be a movement afoot now to shift right? Instead of shift left, to shift right, with some vendors claiming that UI testing is all you need. Snake oil?
Do those vendors sell UI testing tools exclusively by any chance?
There's a number of ways to interpret this, right? I think that our industry lacks really good synthetic transactions, right? I mean, there's some, I think SOSTA is a good one, and there's a couple of companies, but I do talk to a lot of people about, what is your MTTR and what is your cost of downtime, and do you have a real calculation? Like, what is opportunity cost? I mean, not just like infrastructure ROI. I'm talking about like if you're down for an hour, do you lose 100,000, $1 million, or $1 billion, right? Yeah. And not your SLA, what you get back from the vendor. And then people who are reasonably mature, then I ask, well, how do you get those metrics? And actually most of those, even the mature ones, say, well, we look at the JIRA tickets and the start and the stop. And I'm like, what about synthetic transactions? So I think if the question is, are we not using enough kind of synthetic transactional data to analyze our kind of MTTR, then I agree. I also think the UX stuff is real and valuable from a customer experience, but none of that negates, that the idea of shift left and shift left comes from industry operations management, industrialization, industrial engineering, ultimately from Lean back to Toyota.
Yeah.
That's, you build resilient quality technology, whether it's a car or it's software, by basically everything you find, move it left
and
get it earlier, because the cost of it to the right is much more expensive than the more every step you get it left, you save a tremendous amount of money from catching it there versus one step to the right.
I mean, even in the goal, in Goldratt's book, it's, do the testing that fails a high percentage of your parts before you do the expensive test that only fails 1% of your parts, right? I mean,
it's almost like,
if the software industry was a car company, we would suck.
Talk to any carpenter, like measure twice, cut once, right? I mean, so.
Yeah, so can you exclusively solve this problem through UI testing? No, it's necessary but not sufficient. I think it is what I would say.
Just a little housekeeping, hit a couple of the questions. So the websites were not DevSecOps.com, it was DevSecOps with an S.com is what the community John is forming. And then Shannon Leitz's site is DevSecOps.org.
Right.
So if you guys want to check those out, I think that might be why you're having a problem.
.com should be now aggregated to the stuff that the community.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Someone was saying they.
All right, we'll make sure of that. I mean, the goal was a lot of people had this who were involved in the community, and everybody's kind of giving it back to. So the goal is any of the DevSecOps should be actually now start pointing to one place where all the people owners are in on. Let's create one place where we can share everything. So.
Got it. So. And again, just people might have joined late. The slides will be available. The recording will be available on DevOps.com and YouTube. But let's get back to some really good questions here. Is there a good automated tool to detect CVEs? I don't know if he means like when the new CVE comes out to get an alert or to detect vulnerabilities based on CVEs.
Both seem like useful
Jeffrey
things.
Alvarez.
Yeah, I mean, certainly scanning, right? And then again, we talked about you should have multiple scanners, you should have proprietary and open source, and
So I think there's also a feed you could get from MITRE.
Yeah,
because
they, along with NIST, they publish a lot of this.
Yeah, they're definitely,
and you can get.
There's, I mean, again, Fannie Mae had a risk. They didn't want to divulge what it was, but they subscribed to a risk, and that's
MITRE's open.
Yeah,
I don't think it costs.
That's exactly how they got notified, like about in the afternoon on the 9th. The CISO got everybody in a war room about, basically about, close of business. And it was, a professional service that basically warned you of high risk profile.
So that is, threat analysis. Right. There's a ton of threat information. Speeds out there.
And I think also, I mean, no matter what tool that is that you use, you got to use it not just as part of your pipeline to production, but you got to make sure you keep running it against what's in production, because new vulnerabilities crop up, right? You may not be running your builds anymore, but
with the little time we have, one thing I wanted to bend in, which is something that Citra and Lago said. We talked about they were so efficient at remediating the struts 2 and Equifax took so long. And I said, why do you think? And I think it is a shift that happened in DevOps, where pre-DevOps, the world kind of thought you could buy IBM HP and the world was going to be great. And I still think the security mindset sells a lot of this. You spent $10 million. I'm safe. I got these guys, I spent $20 million, one choke to throw. I mean, one of the things that DevOps killed is the one choke to throw.
Yeah.
That's out of here. Yeah. There's only one choke. It's your choke.
Yeah.
And what Chitra said is, that we use tools here, we use open source here, we use scripts here. But the key is we bend all this to our will.
Yeah.
Right? That's the thing you have to realize. Nobody's going to protect your ROI. Nobody else is going to. No single solution is going to protect you from getting Equifax.
Yeah.
You have to figure out how to get all the things you need to protect yourself. And it might be a vendor solution here. It might be a script here. It might be an open source tool here. But don't believe that any one person or vendor is going to solve all this.
I think you got to go across vendors. You got to do open source. And, when you're in front of Congress testifying about this, saying that you spent $50 million, with IBM or CA or somebody, not to pick on anybody, but that's not a good answer.
Yeah.
No, it's not. In fact, that's probably a very bad answer.
I'm old, but I remember the guys from EI testifying about Code Red a long time ago. And it was very similar. That a lot of people were depending on some of the bigger guys at the time. And Code Red was typical, was based on an old an old exploit. But anyway, gentlemen, if we had another hour, we could probably get to the rest of these questions, but we're pretty much out of time. I got to tell you, I love this format where it was just around.
It's fun.
literally
It's
sitting
a lot
around the
easier
table
to interact,
chatting.
that's for sure.
No beers. It was a little early for beers.
Yeah,
Next time. Anyway, John Willis, Anders Wallgren, thanks for joining us today. Hey, super shout out to Electric Cloud for sponsoring today's webinar. And, you know, here live at RSA San Francisco 2018. This was a great webinar. Hope you enjoyed it. It's Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com, and we'll see you soon on another webinar, folks. Okay.